my asset management journey started around 1977, just a few years ago. That's when I joined the Navy. So I started out, went through the enlisted nuclear power program, did a little over 12 years in the Navy, got a chance to go back to school. They went through the enlisted commissioning program, went back to school and spent a few years in the fleet as a division officer. But then since leaving the Navy, I've been in maintenance, asset management, facilities management, pretty much since 1990 in the civilian sector. Been involved in the ISO 55000 U.S. Technical Advisory Group with Jim. I started right before they actually published the ISO 55000 standard. I joined in late 2013, and they published the first set of standards was published in January 2014. And then after that was published, I met with several other leaders kind of in the pharmaceutical industry in the maintenance and asset management area. And we approached the International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineers about developing a good practice guide specific to asset management and ISO 55000 and how it could be applied in the pharmaceutical industry. And that was around the summer of 2015. So it took us a little over 4 years to get it from kind of concept to actually, it was the good practice guide was published November of last year.
Now, I'm sure that even though it's focused on pharmaceutical, there are some principles that apply to other sectors. Can you tell us a little bit about the guidebook and how others might be able to benefit from it?
Yes, basically we took good practice, global good practices, not just from ISO 55000, but through different industries, and tried to develop the good practice guide with examples on how to develop an asset management policy, say, or the strategic asset management plan, and basically how it can be applied in any, highly regulated industry. That's really the key for the pharmaceutical industry. Is it's so heavily regulated. You have so many different hoops or whatever to jump through that you just can't, implement it without considering all the other quality and regulatory type, implications.
So nuclear power, utilities in general that have both that have national, state, and local regulations, others like that could at least see some of the key principles, if not all the details.
Yes. Yep. It's primarily focused towards the pharmaceutical, but it could be really applied to any heavily regulated. And actually in the pharmaceutical industry, there is a sector that's a radiopharmaceutical that has to abide by certain NRC, the National or Nuclear Regulatory Commission regulations too. So it kind of ties in with that too.
Yeah, you do touch on that directly then. Okay, so interesting thing about the pharmaceutical industry is it's changing dramatically. Can you give us a little bit of overview of where the industry is going and how the change in the direction of the industry is impacting the way assets are managed?
Okay. Yeah, there's quite a bit of new technology, that's coming out or is currently in development. The one technology is called CRISPR, CRISPR, and it's CAS9. It's actually a gene editing technology. So the cell and gene therapy portion of the pharmaceutical industry is rapidly developing. And that is now kind of transforming traditional pharmaceuticals from being large scale, large batch sizes now to individual therapies. So the scale of the operations is very small because it's going to be now a batch is one individual therapy versus typically there may be thousands of doses that are produced in one batch for traditional large scale manufacturing.
Mhm.
So the CRISPR and some of the other gene and cell therapy technologies is really transitioning some of the pharmaceutical industry into a much smaller single use small scale operation.
That changes everything related to maintenance, turnover, machinery, cleaning, pipe cleaning, everything.
Oh yeah. Really the time frame typically for a normal manufacturing is maybe several months from the time they schedule production to the time the drug is actually delivered to pharmacies or wherever it's being delivered to. With the cell and gene therapy, it's down to I'll say 2 weeks, and they're really going to try to push it down to say 2 to 3 days. So they'll take us, like I was saying, they'll take a specimen from a patient, deliver it to the manufacturing site, and then within a few days they have to identify the gene sequence that is needs to be modified, and then develop the therapy and then get it back to the patient. So they're looking now at building small scale manufacturing facilities next to major medical centers or hospitals. So you'll be right next door to where the patient is, and it'll reduce the time for transportation, the chain of custody, things like that.
What is the title given to these?
They're called edge manufacturing facilities, which means they're right on the edge of where the patient is going to be. Instead of being in large manufacturing, facilities in big areas around the country, there'll be multiples, kind of the same, almost like cookie cutter layouts, because they'll be using similar processes and technologies, but they'll be right there at the medical center or at the hospital.
So that takes the assets from a single large location and creates a portfolio of facilities with numerous, maybe repeated or similar equipment. Layout is just as important for the people to be able to be switched from one location to another depending on need. Being able to go into that cookie cutter facility and know where things are and how they operate.
Yes, and actually that's one of the things we've seen with this pandemic is when you have to scale up rapidly, like they've done with this Operation Warp Speed. With the company I'm with, CAI, we've been kind of stressed providing additional resources for all the different pharmaceutical companies because some of them have had processes that were in place. Like there's one location, they had a process that was ready to start producing a new drug, and they had to quickly transition that to develop a COVID drug.
Mhm.
So they didn't have all the resources they needed in their location. So we had to provide multiple people to their site to help them through the transition. So that's kind of a whole different issue we've got right now too, is finding enough qualified people that can quickly jump in and help them when you're doing a rapid transition like they're doing.
So tell us more about what CAI does to help the pharmaceutical industry.
We try to provide a full range of services to everything from helping in the design phase all the way through production. We have several, they call them principal consultants now, senior level people that can help go through and do, say, operational readiness assessments, let them know, where different companies have weaknesses and what they need to do to improve their processes and operations. But we provide kind of a full range of all the different things that are required to help a pharmaceutical company produce, the therapies and drugs that they do.
And I suspect you're using the ISPE guidebook along with ISO 55000 as tools to assist in this process?
Yes, that's one of the big pluses with ISPE is they have numerous good practice guides. Actually, when this started, they had a maintenance good practice guide. And when we first proposed this, they said, well, why don't you just go ahead and add a section on to the maintenance good practice guide. And it took a little while to educate them that asset management and maintenance, although they're related, asset management is actually, a framework, a higher level system that you put in place that it helps, manage the maintenance portion of it. But it's much more than just an addition to the maintenance manual. So we did that. We developed a good practice guide for asset management. And then we also decided there was a equipment reliability good practice guide that needed to be developed. So they're still in the process of revising the maintenance one that was developed back in 2009. And they're just about ready to publish an equipment reliability good practice guide.
That helps establish the differentiation between asset management and maintenance and reliability.
Yes. Yeah, they're all three very key to managing assets, but the asset management basically sets the framework and basically gets all the different functional areas kind of to work together.
Okay, so how is all this reflecting in your approach to the pharmaceutical sector asset leadership structure that we're going to be including with our national asset leadership strategy for the new administration in a position paper?
I think part of it's going to be one of the other shifts is to contract manufacturing. A lot of companies are, especially as quickly as they develop these COVID vaccines, some companies just want to focus on the actual drug development. So there's several large contract manufacturing companies that are expanding rapidly, and we're seeing a little bit of a transition that way. So asset management is going to be extremely important for the contract manufacturing companies because they want to show how they can mitigate the risk for the companies that are going to be contracting with them. So if they can prove to them they've got a very robust asset management system in place and processes in place, I think that will help them reassure, and hopefully get more clients on their side as far as being able to produce for the, pharmaceutical companies.
Excellent. And I've had the privilege of working with you and your colleagues on different initiatives, including the FAME, Pharmaceutical Asset Information Management. What's your plans for FAME and how it can be helpful to the industry?
The ISPE has their version of Industry 4.0, which is really the digital transformation. They call it Pharma 4.0. And that primarily is more centered right now around the regulatory side. So the thought was to do a proof of concept with this FAME model to kind of show them exactly what can be done as far as managing the assets digitally, and basically developing that model for them.
Okay, so it's a initiative that will help link the Asset Leadership Network to the ISPE, which is something that the ALN wants to do, is to provide the asset management expertise that we have into the various sectors that can benefit from it.
Yes. Yep. I think that'd be a key connection there if we can make that work.
Okay. And you have some concepts for what are good first case studies. At your headquarters in Indianapolis, you have a device, and I always forget the name of it. Can you explain about that?
Yeah, it's a clean in place system. They call it a skid. So basically it's a tank, it's pumps, it's chemical injection systems, all basically on a framework, which they call a skid. And it's a common system that's used throughout the pharmaceutical industry because once they're done producing a product, and this is again more for the large scale manufacturing, they'll run through and run chemicals through the system to basically clean the system out and make sure that the system's prepared for the whatever next drug, if it's the same drug again. But between batches, they have to basically clean their processes and clean their systems. So our thought was to go ahead and do a 3D rendering of this clean in place system to use that as our example for how you can apply this FAME process.
Okay, very good. And we're starting to get some questions. We might go to some of them, but there's one that's of interest to me also I want to bring up. I had mentioned that you were involved in some of the vaccine the companies that are developing the vaccine. Someone wants to know, what have you done specifically, or can you talk about what you've done with the companies involved with the vaccine? How have you helped those efforts?
Primarily, well, it's kind of all over the place, really. With one company, like I say, they had a process and a product they were ready to produce. They basically were, I'd say, maybe a few months away from being able to produce a new product. And then when COVID hit, they basically decided to shut that process down and convert it to a new product that they had just barely started to develop. So basically, we helped them. They shut the facility down. We helped them with all the documentation to basically decommission it, and then to recommission it with either new equipment and a new process. And it requires change control and quite a few different things that are required in order to convert the process over. The other things we've done are with contract manufacturers. We had one company that was producing their own product, but they had all the right equipment and processes to develop the COVID vaccine. So we basically helped them convert everything over. It's a tech transfer, they call it. So they would take a process from another company, bring it into their facility, and then be able to prove that they can produce it. So we've done some of those things. And then the companies that are actually like Moderna or some of those companies, we work directly with them to provide additional resources as they're developing and going through the clinical trials and testing and everything like that.
So what kind of assistance is provided? Now, clearly the commissioning, taking the facility offline and then preparing it for the new drug, that's clearly an asset management activity.
Mm-hmm.
With Moderna, what are some of the activities and how do you relate them to asset management?
There's a pretty extensive qualification process for the equipment. They call it an installation qualification, an operational, and there's a performance qualification, which requires a lot of documentation. So we basically help them with that as far as getting the equipment qualified and validated. The other thing is we help them develop standard operating procedures, maintenance procedures, develop their spare parts programs, things like that basically prepare that process so that they can start producing the drugs.
Okay. And what are your time frames and schedules been for that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard that it typically takes around 4 years from the time they start the development to actually producing a vaccine. And with this being, 9 months from when they flipped the switch to say they needed to start developing it to actually now with Pfizer and Moderna starting to hopefully produce here pretty quick. We've had to provide a lot of resources to help them accelerate the process and get it to the point where they could actually start producing the drug.
Thank you for taking time to talk with us. It seems like, based on what you're saying, you barely have time to sleep. Is your company expanding due to this?
Yeah, and actually that's one of the issues we're having in the same throughout the whole pharmaceutical industry right now is finding qualified people. Um, we have several open positions. A lot of areas, where they have requested proposals from us, and we just don't have the resources to even submit proposals for some of the work. So yeah, we're continuing to grow. When I started with the company back in 2013, we had around 200 employees, and we were sort of global at that point. Now we've got over 600, and they're really trying to grow to about 1,000 employees within the next couple of years. They see that much growth and expansion. We're not only in pharmaceutical, but that's one of our major areas. We're in data centers, is another huge area that's growing and expanding. We provide commissioning services for data centers like Google and Facebook and Microsoft and those types of places. And another area, the cannabis area, is actually an extremely, I guess, growing, expanding area. And that's another area that we're starting to provide more and more support for. They're not regulated through the FDA yet, but it doesn't look like it'll be much longer before the FDA will be involved in the regulation of that industry, the CBD, oil, hemp, that area too. So, yeah, we've got quite a few different areas that we're involved in.
Natural connection to the pharmaceutical industry there for the medicinal marijuana. That's what kind of regulations are pending for the traditional pharmaceutical industry? Do you know if there's any bills, or is there any reaction to these edge facilities and requirements to make sure they stay safe, or the same regulations for the bigger operations being applied to the smaller operation? And is that fair?
With that CRISPR technology in the cell and gene therapy, there's definitely new regulations that are being developed around that, since it is kind of unique where it's going to be a specific individualized medicine. There's a little bit more oversight, I think, that needs to be done for some of those, versus once you have a drug that's going to be applied to thousands of people or millions of people, that's different than if you do the individualized. So there definitely will be some changes in the industry for that. I haven't seen exactly what they're doing with that yet, but that's definitely going to continue, I think, as that becomes more mature.
And there's a question about any asset management specifics for the marijuana industry, what you were talking about. What are you being asked to do there?
Right now, since it's not regulated by the FDA, a lot of it's more just on developing quality systems for them and asset management systems. The CBD oil has been a big growth area. And so there's a few major manufacturers of that, and their asset management is not good right now. They've been spending an excessive amount of money, I guess, in maintenance and upkeep, because they don't have a developed asset management system. So that's been our biggest focus, I guess, is trying to get our arms around what we can do to help them develop their asset management programs.
Okay.
Well, we're near the end, and I got one question I wanted to ask Bob before we get to any final thoughts. So you've been at this for a while in asset management, as you mentioned, involved in TC 251 for ISO 55000. Do you have any thoughts you can share on, on the evolution of asset management since ISO 55000 has come out, and the impact on the industries you're involved in?
Yeah, I think it's like anything, like even what you've seen in the federal side, it wasn't immediately embraced, but now as time goes on, I think there's more and more people within the pharmaceutical industry that understand what ISO 55000 is about. I think the good practice guide will help kind of further that a little bit, but it's still, I don't think it's hit its pace yet as far as people fully understanding what the value is. But there's several really, professional people out there within the pharmaceutical, like Scott Morris, and several other people like that are really pushing to educate the industry on the value, of ISO 55000 asset management.